Let's go. Hello and welcome again to another episode of a Junior VC Behind the Scenes. I'm your host Mazen, and this week I have with me Path and Omkar, and we're going to talk about this week's piece: Are electric vehicles India's future or a premature fad? So Path, can you get us started by telling our audience why we chose to write about electric vehicles for this week's piece?
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, if you just look at the entire landscape, as in, if you just talk about numbers, as in India, particularly, so the market of, let's say, two-wheeler, four-wheeler, and three-wheeler itself is close to like 2.5 crore vehicles. Basically, so 2.5 crore vehicles are sold every year in India. But if you look at the penetration, in the sense that the EV penetration per se in India, so for the two-wheeler, it's basically less than 1%. And recently there are a couple of developments which has happened. So now the bigger players are making an entry, and there was a lot of hue and cry that why Maruti is not doing it or why Hero is not doing it, etc., etc. But in the first week of January itself, Hero announced that they are investing millions of dollars in Ather, and then now they are a majority of shareholders in Ather. Post the investment, prior to investment it was close to like 35%. Post investment it will be um, uh, the percentage is yet to be seen, but the point being, they are going to launch the first EV in the month of March, and it is going to be the first major established player who is going to launch the EV in India. And I think that makes the entire sector into perspective, as in, so all this while all the startups were focusing on launching EV, but now the first major player, apart from, let's say, Tata, who is already into the four-wheelers, the two-wheelers players are also now getting into um, India. Apart from that, Tesla is also planning to set up a huge factory in India, and then planning to launch vehicles in India in, let's say, in a couple of years' time. So I think that makes the entire sector into perspectives that India is a huge market. Now players are taking a notice of it. The infrastructure is getting sorted out. So I think now is the right time. Let's say talk about this entire piece, and hence the ajvc team got together and decided to write about this piece here.
Thanks, Path. So let's dive into it. Certainly a really interesting time for electric vehicles in India, a lot going on. I believe we actually started back in 1996, Omkar. Can you tell us a bit about the origins of the sector?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Parth, for the introduction. So, if you see, right, in 1884, what happened is Nikola Tesla, and Thomas Edison, they collaborated to develop commercial electricity, right? So that's when this whole domain, EV domain, you would say, started, because commercial electricity was the main thing that powers these vehicles, right? So at the time, Tesla didn't know what he was starting. So, but his name would re-emerge later, as we know Tesla by Elon Musk is a big company. Everyone knows the name Tesla now. And so that's when in 1884, that's when the EV revolution, I would say, started. And, contrary to the perceptions that we have, even I had this perception that, EV is a very recent concept. It's not actually. It started as early as the 1900s, right? Like Martin was mentioning, in India, at least, we had the first vehicle in 1996, but the whole domain, like the whole sector, started in 1900s, while the electric cars were enjoying massive adoption across US, right? And they were counting up to like a third of all the vehicles on the road. Even people like Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, they also threw their weight behind the cars and started making EVs. But Henry Ford came up with this Model T, right? And that Model T dealt like a blow to the electric cars. And the reason being, this was already 1912, by the way. So the only reason was the gasoline cars that he made cost $650, while the electric roadster sold for more than $1,700, right? So that's a huge difference, I'd say. So that basically put EVs back a few steps, and then they faced like a Kodak moment, right? So how the Kodak company basically lost its momentum. Similarly, these electric cars started perishing from the market, and they were being replaced by cheap gasoline powered cars. And this would impact like almost all the world, not just US. And but slowly things would change, and like like I mentioned, in 1996, India got its first electric vehicle in the form of a three-wheeler called Vikram Safa. It was developed by Scooter India in Lucknow, right? And it was operated by a 72-volt lead-acid battery. For context, right now we use lithium-ion batteries. So then we used to use lead-acid batteries, right? So, and at that time, around 400 vehicles were sold. And yeah, that's how it started. And in 2000, the Indian electrical behemoth BHEL, right, Bharat Heavy Electronics Limited, they would follow suit and launch an 18-seater e-bus, and it had an AC induction motor and a 96-volt lead-acid battery, same battery. We haven't switched to lithium-ion yet. And around 200 vehicle vans were sold in and operated in Delhi. But the issue was that due to lack of consistency, right, and shorter battery life, battery technology was not there yet, and extremely high battery costs, they ran into some issues, and then it would again take some time for the EVs to launch in India, right? So come 1999, right? So Chetan Maini, I'm sorry for the pronunciation. He is a Stanford grad, right? He returned to India, and his dream was to build India's first electric car, and that was his main priority when he came back. And as a student, he had won a top prize for building a solar powered car for a race, and Stanford, I guess. And ever since then, he had been fascinated by alternative fuels for automobiles, and he had been tinkering and was thinking like he could build something for India, right? And after 7 years of hard work, Chetan launched India's first electric car in 2001, and he named it Reva. I think you might have heard of Reva, the small yellow electric car that we see even now. Yes, some of you must have seen it on the road nowadays, but it was launched in 2001, and it was named after his mother, which meant a new beginning in Sanskrit, right? But Reva, even though it was named after his mother, it was an acronym for Revolutionary Electric Vehicle Alternative, right? So yeah, so that was how EV cars started coming in India. But at the time, there was non-existent VC ecosystem in India, and he had very few avenues to find funding, right? So he had to find funds from traditional sources like ICICI Bank, Indian Government Technology Development Board. But then he realized very early that the new market like EVs, just building good products was not really useful, right? People didn't know what EVs used to do. So he had to educate the market and the customers. So that's when, that was one of the things that he wanted to do. But sadly, just after a month, after Reva was launched, the government doubled the taxes on electric cars and removed all the subsidies, which was like a huge blow to them, right? Like imagine you are building something for 7 years and suddenly the government changes policy.
They just changed the rules overnight. That's crazy.
Exactly.
But I mean, so and thanks a lot for that really good summary. And it's quite surprising that EVs actually started such a long time ago. But what's really changed is the cost difference, right? EVs were so much more expensive, and as technologies evolved, now they are closer in cost to gasoline cars. But what problems are they solving? I mean, you touched on this a bit and said it was part of the challenge that we had to, educate the market about the problems that EVs are solving. Obviously, there's the environmental benefit, but apart from that, what are the problems electric vehicles tackling?
So I think they are solving 8 main problems. One is the lower maintenance cost, and we will mention this later. But the major reason for that is lesser moving parts and lesser basically things that need maintenance, right? So that reduces the reduces the maintenance cost. Then there's no noise pollution, because since the engine is it's a battery and it's almost no noise, that's why there's no noise pollution. Then the third thing is convenience. You could charge your EVs at home. You don't need to go to the fuel pump to fill fuel, or a charging station to charge necessarily. You can just charge them at home. So that was convenience there. And even the operating cost was lower, right? So because they are cheaper, and then you don't have to pay for petrol, and relatively electricity, the charging costs are cheaper. So the whole operation, operating a EV costed lesser. And then it was easy to drive, right? Because there's no clutch mechanism in EVs. You just have to press the accelerator and the brake. So that way they were easy to drive, and environmental benefits like Martin mentioned, right? Because they have almost very less pollution directly from the EVs. And safety wise also, I'd say they were better. The only reason for that is like batteries had to go through rigorous testing before they were implemented in EVs, right? And compared to say combustible fuels, batteries won't just blast on you if you like say are in an accident or something, but there's a high chance that fuels will burn and then there would be a fire, right? So, and also the last thing is that the fuel price hikes won't affect EVs because they run on batteries, electricity. So yeah, those are the problems that were being solved. Uh,
So quite a large shift. I mean, now we're talking about maybe a slightly higher upfront cost, but then much lower maintenance and operating costs going forward, as well as benefits to the environment. So there are definitely a lot of problems that EVs are solving. When did we start seeing the first early signs of growth, Omkar, in the EV market? I mean, you spoke about the regulatory environment being unfriendly and actually changing and hurting some of the early companies. When did we see that evolving?
Yeah, so like I said, right, 2001 was when Reva launched, and side by side in that decade, in the 2000s, the major change was happening in battery technology. So lead acid battery, which was used, we were moving to lithium-ion batteries, and these were going to be used. Like the major driver of this change were the phone manufacturers because they were rapidly researching these technologies to fit them into small phones, right? So you'd think that EV manufacturers would lead the research R&D, but phone manufacturers actually led the R&D for lithium-ion batteries, and Sony pioneered the first lithium-ion battery for commercial use in handycam. If you remember the handycam, uh, so Sony pioneered that, and Motorola helped make them lightweight for the use in phones. And that's how this whole thing started, right? And the lithium-ion battery would go on to power the first iPhone. iPhone was a huge deal back then when it was launched, 2004, I guess. Uh, and due to the onset of globalization in India, all the technology started coming into India. And by 2005, we had around 200 dealers, 55 traders who were trying to enter the Indian EV market, and particularly the two-wheeler segment, right? So, but most of these traders, what they did was they just sold the EVs, like sold the two-wheelers and forgot about it. So that was kind of a blow to the industry, right? Because if you don't get maintenance, you don't get parts for it, then what's the use? People stop using it, right? So even though we were moving on to a moving faster into the whole EV race, things were not quite there, I'd say. And but Hero was starting to have like a nice moment that they had a massive two-wheeler EV opportunity in India, right? And so in 2007, Hero Cycles, they in partnership with UK-based Ultra Motors, they launched the series of two-wheeler bikes, right? And these electric bikes became popular among companies as well, right? And bike manufacturers like Electrotherm India, TVS Motors, Hero Electric, which was earlier Hero Ultra, they were some of the companies that started to build these electric bikes at scale. And because of these big players entering the Indian market, we saw an influx of reliable manufacturing and maintenance schemes, and customers started to trust the EVs again. So yeah, that's what happened in the late 2000s, I'd say.
Which, I mean, so the problem of the cost of the vehicle was solved, and the technology had improved. Now we move on to the next challenge, which you touched on a bit, which was the infrastructure. So can you elaborate a bit more on that challenge and
Yeah.
explain why?
So, as India entered 2010, we already talked about it. Big manufacturers were coming into play. We had good maintenance, good manufacturing, but the public infrastructure was not quite there, right? Because right now, if you see, if you want to refuel your vehicle, there's like a fuel stop every few hundred meters, and you can just do that. Like, but if you're going on the road and suddenly your battery dies for EV, what do you do? Right? There might not be a charging station somewhere. So that range anxiety that people had, that was not taken care of yet, right? And there was no adequate charging infrastructure, and even the battery capacities were not quite there yet. They were like not quite there. Like, so setting up the charging infrastructure was the main thing that we needed to do first, right? So, but it was a challenge. In urban cities, maybe it was possible because people would pay, and then even then it was tough for companies because in urban cities compared to rural areas, the costs of real estate were high. So and so that being so because of that, the eventual cost would lie on the customer, right? The company won't bear all the costs. Customers would have to somehow bear all the costs. So that's why the additional costs were like a barrier for it. But if you see in 2012, the total cost of setting up one charging station was quite high. The infrastructure costs were estimated to be around 20 lakhs, and another 14 lakhs as
Per
the charger
station
costs.
itself.
Yeah.
To install it, and
So
14 lakhs for the actual charger. Wow.
yeah. So that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
But this market is uh, it's supposed to grow exponentially. I'd say in 2020 it was estimated to be $45 million, and in 2026 it's estimated to be $158 million. So there's a huge opportunity, right, for
Yeah.
public infrastructure to grow. And there was some things that were being experimented, like battery swapping. People just come and swap batteries, so they don't own the batteries, the companies own the batteries, and they just go to station and swap the batteries. So that was one thing that was being
Which was what was truly
experimented.
revolutionary, right? Like you don't need to have that range anxiety, you just change your battery.
Exactly. And even by 2014, right? So the number of charging stations, you could count them on your fingers. They were not a lot, and even across the world, they were in the thousands. So yeah, that's where we were in the 2010s, I would say.
Thanks, Omkar, for that part. If you can maybe elaborate a bit on when the sector started growing, and how they tackled some of these challenges with infrastructure that Omkar mentioned.
Yeah. So if you see the entire India's market, so India is very unique in the sense that only 22 cars per 1,000 people. But if you just look at and that's probably one of the lowest in the world in terms of if you compare about the geography wise and the population wise. But if you look at the two-wheelers ownership, it's one of the highest in the world. So more than 230, 240 vehicles per 1,000 people. And like I mentioned, so the combined sales between two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and four-wheeler every year is close to like 2.5 crores. So cumulatively, we will probably have around 20-25 crore vehicles on the road right now. So the opportunity is extremely high. Opportunity is there. But if you just look about the EV penetration, let's say before 2014-15, when as the Omkar suggested, so there's a huge infrastructure cost, and it's more like a leveraging game, right? So if you don't have vehicles on the road, why will somebody or any businessman will
Build
be
infrastructure.
compelled? Yeah, so will build the infrastructure. It's more like a chicken and egg problem.
Exactly.
So you have to have at least a critical mass. So by then, even if you look at let's say 2020, so the two-wheelers EV penetration was less than 1%. So the entire India sold like less than 2 lakh bikes in EV segment versus let's say um, uh, uh, the rest is basically on the ICE. However, there was one particular segment which was picking up, and that was the three-wheeler segment. So in three-wheelers post 2015-16, people realized that people are using three-wheelers primarily in the metros, especially for the last mile delivery or the last mile travel. And by then we had a penetration of close to like 15%. And that's where people targeted, as in the business is targeted, if they can build an infrastructure around three-wheelers, then more and more three-wheelers will be adopted, and subsequently two-wheelers and four-wheelers will be adopted too. So that's the entire crux of it. So if you just look at how people are using vehicles in India, so 70% of the work trips were shorter than 5 kilometers. So that's basically a last mile delivery, and the 10% extended beyond 10 kilometers. Okay, and that's why you will see post 2015-16, a lot of companies were trying to come up with the short range vehicles, basically the speed limit, speed not extending beyond let's say 60-70 kilometers per hour. So that solves the problem around range anxiety, because you don't need a complicated infrastructure or complicated battery setup a limited amount or limited size of a battery will work probably. There were a couple of players who were targeting, let's say, 100 kilometers per hour kind of a range as well. But then you are competing with likes of Royal Enfield or a Splendor or a Pulsar kind of a variety. That market will pick up sooner or later because the EV infrastructure is getting ready. The another issue was with respect to the refueling and the charging, like the Omkar said. So refueling generally takes less than 5 minutes, and the petrol pump stations are available everywhere. But the charging takes more than, let's say, 2 hours. So the shorter, the smaller the battery, the easier it is to charge, and hence the swapping battery came into picture. So just extending that particular thought, if you just talk about the economics of battery swapping. So if you are buying a battery, then that will probably cost you around 35,000 per vehicle. A short range battery, 2.5 to 3 kilowatt hour, and to fuel or to recharge the entire battery will cost you around 30 rupees. But if you are swapping, the one time swapping will cost you around 50 to 60 rupees. So that's basically an easier solution compared to, let's say, a fueling something which will probably cost you, let's say, 120 at present. So I think this kind of a model is picking up. There are a couple of startups which are making a dent in this particular business model. So basically pay per usage, and either pay per usage or subscription model. However, over a period of time, this will become costlier and people will adopt to a battery charging per se, because owning a battery is much more cheaper, because the battery cost itself will reduce from 30,000 to, let's say, 10 to 15,000. So that's how the entire dynamic is right now playing out.
Interesting. So with some of these infrastructure problems sort of solved, can we talk a bit about the competitive landscape around 2019, 2020? What did it look like? I'm assuming a lot more players entered the market and things were getting a bit hotter.
So post 2016, government also started to take notice that something is changing in this EV entire infrastructure space. So government started or government came out with this particular policy called as the FAME policy, which is faster adoption and manufacturing of hybrid and electric vehicles. So currently we are in phase 2 of FAME policy, but FAME 1 focused primarily on the vehicle manufacturing. So in the first phase, government spent close to in the form of subsidies 340 plus crores to just empower 2.5 lakh of EVs. Post 2018, government figured out that now the manufacturing problem is sort of sorted. People are now so Hero is doing something, Ather is doing something, Tata is doing something. So that's so EV manufacturing problem is sort of sorted. So now they had to shift the focus on the infrastructure part. So government came out with the FAME 2 policy. So under that, government agreed to support 1 million electric two-wheelers, primarily two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and with the incentive of 2,000 per vehicle with an ex-factory price. Price of less than 150,000, and then they had to source 50% from the local market. So if you just take an example of an Ather which cost beyond 150,000, so you get an FAME 2 subsidy of close to 40 to 43,000 rupees. So that's an good amount of incentive for an owner to consider that yes, we can go with an EV. Government also approved more than 2,500 charging stations under FAME 2, so that problem is also getting taken care of. We have now public infrastructure at least in the urban cities. So government is actually trying to focus on that. Policymakers have now trying to provide the right policy framework for enabling, and this is what will push sector in the right direction. And we have already seen the green offshoots of that. So Ather sold like close to 3,000 vehicles, growing more than 30%. Ola is coming up with S1. Pre-booking is more than 1 lakh bikes already. Tata's doing phenomenally well post the launch of e-vehicles and couple of other vehicles in the IC space. Somewhere around 2015, 16, 17, Tata Motors had a market share of 4% in the entire four-wheeler space, which has now grown to close to like 13%. So it's more like a 4x jump from there. So everything is now coming together. And now the companies are now trying to um, playing around the pricing or playing around marketing, as in how we can get the maximum from the customers. So that's how the entire landscape is right now.
The entire landscape is sort of converging, right? We have technology that's evolving, the manufacturing problem has been solved, the infrastructure problem has been solved, and governments are kind of subsidizing people to encourage people to buy EVs. So it certainly sounds like a rather exciting time. Can you talk a bit more about the state of the sector today and what the future of the sector looks like
Right.
in the year?
Right. So when you just look at the EV as in or EV economics from the consumer's perspective, so there is something called as the TCO, which is the total cost of ownership. So at present, and probably for the next 2 or 3 years, this problem at least should get sorted out. Is basically the cost, or close to like 50% of the vehicle's cost is because of the battery. Okay. And this battery cost has come down by, let's say, close to like 70% in the past decade. More and more adoption, more and more efficiency utilization with the technology advancement, this will come down further. So the cost of EV bike per se will come down further. Now when you look at the per kilometer pricing, so if you talk about just petrol and diesel in India, so and the kind of two-wheelers which the IC runs on, and is basically in this particular segment where the EV is getting a competition from, they do not have averages more than 45-50 kilometers per liter. So per kilometer, these are the kind of bikes which will cost user 2 rupees per kilometer. But if you look at EV, for the similar average, they will not require more than 25 to 30 rupees, as in full charge of around 3 kilowatt hour battery, and it will provide a range of 50-60 kilometers per charge. So that cost will come down to, let's say, 0.5 rupees per kilometer. So that the differential is technically will keep on increasing 1.5 to 1.8 rupees per kilometer. And if right now the differential between EV and IC is, let's say, close to 50,000, so EV is costing me after the subsidy around 1.4 lakhs, and the IC is combustion engine vehicle likes of Activa, etc., which the consumers get around 90-95,000. So the differential will be filled by this cost advantage with respect to fuel in close to like 4.5 years. If the battery cost comes down further, then this differential will be able to, the user will be breaking even this particular differential in less than 3 years, and that is going to be huge. And I have no doubt that this will go down further. Same is the case with battery swapping market. India cumulatively have close to like 25 crore vehicles, two-wheelers, four-wheelers, and three-wheelers. If one vehicle requires 1.5 to 2 times the battery, because battery needs to be in the warehouse as well, somebody will charge and somebody can replace the battery. Market itself is like 50 crore batteries. In the next 5-7 years will be needed. If each battery costs, let's say, even 3,000 rupees, then the battery market itself is like 1.5 lakh crores. So in my opinion, as in this category and the supply category itself is going to be extremely attractive for a lot of players, and that's why you see now the likes of Heroes or Tatas are entering into this space. Ather is getting funded. A lot of other startups are getting funded. Ola, without even shipping a bike, is making a lot of noise, and all for the right reasons. Tesla's market cap is higher than the all listed entities market cap who is into ICE space, despite having shipped lesser and lesser amount of the vehicles. Obviously they are playing on the software, etc., but I think at least in the next decade you will see much faster adoption, and the entire space getting at least in India, at least specific categories, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, will get a lot of traction in this particular space. So I am quite optimistic about this.
Thanks a lot, Pat. Certainly sounds like there's a lot to look forward to as technology improves and the cost of batteries come down. We will see a more clear benefit to owning EV vehicles in terms of cost of ownership. Uh, Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this week's episode of A Junior VC Behind the Scenes. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you again soon.